lecture. He says there's no really hard scientific evidence to support the theory of evolution. But the creation forest of life fits the facts. Natural selection is a fact. Mutations are a fact. But natural selection plus mutation equals molecule-to-man evolution? That is not a fact. And why isn't it? Because concerning the chance origin of the simplest life form, the evolutionists can't explain where the information came from. Didn't come from matter, came from a mind. But they rule out a mind. They say there was no mind. Bacteria to biologist evolution, goo to you evolution, there are no indisputable transitional fossils. And natural selection and mutation in living things does not produce the new information necessary to change one kind of creature into another. To change a creature that doesn't have feathers and hollow bones into a creature that does have feathers and hollow bones. To change a creature that doesn't have hair into a creature that does have hair. To change a creature that gives birth to offspring inside an egg to creatures that give birth to offspring live. They don't have the way to make the new genetic information. Now, one other thing before we finish here. Evolution, the issue here between evolution and creation is not an issue between microevolution and macroevolution. A lot of creationists used to say that. But we need to get that kind of language out of our mind. Because the issue is not the size of change. The issue is the direction of change. It's not that if you just take a lot of little micro changes and add millions of years, you'll get macro changes. The problem is all of the changes that the evolutionists have are going in the downhill direction, and we need something to go in the uphill direction. So the issue is the origin and addition of genetic information. That's what we have to communicate to people who've been evolutionized, because all they will ever hear is change, change, change. It's a certain kind of change. It's an increase of information. Well, so what? Is this just something that's interesting to people who really like science? No, it has very practical ramifications. Charles Darwin said this: "A man who has no assured and ever-present belief in the existence of a personal God or of a future existence with retribution and reward can have for his rule of life, as far as I can see, only to follow those impulses and instincts which are the strongest and which seem to him the best ones." In other words, you just define your morality according to your own personal opinion. And that kind of philosophy has disastrous consequences, and sometimes they're pretty sad. Here's one evidence of that. You remember the Columbine massacre in 1999? Those two boys, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, who killed 13 students and teachers and injured 25 others. 1 year before they committed that massacre, Eric wrote in his diary, "Sometime in April, me and V will get revenge and will kick natural selection up a few notches." In fact, one of those boys was wearing a T-shirt on the day of the murders that said natural selection. Now, we're not blaming evolution for their behavior, but evolution was clearly an influence in their behavior. And they were thinking, well, it's the survival of the fittest. And they carried out an atrocity. You see, if an ape is in our ancestor, if Darwin's theory is right, then that means there are no moral absolutes. Man just makes his own rules. And what's good for you is good for you. What's good for me is good for me. Which is a nice philosophy. Unless you're all Jewish and my name is Adolf Hitler. Or you're all black and I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Then that's not a nice philosophy. Our culture is being bombarded with this theory of evolution all the time in the popular press. And much of the church doesn't even notice or care. You remember in my first lecture I talked about Pakicetus, and I talked about the scientist who found Pakicetus and described it as a transitional form between land animals and whales. His name was Phil Gingrich. In that National Geographic article that I showed you the cover of it in the first lecture, they talked about the spiritual implications of evolution, and they interviewed Phil Gingrich. And in that article, they quoted him as saying this: "I grew up in a conservative church in the Midwest and was not taught anything about evolution. The subject was clearly skirted. I submit to you that Phil Gingrich is an evolutionist and probably an atheist today, influencing other students because his church failed to teach him how to think about the theory of evolution. He was unprepared for the onslaught he would encounter in college. So, was Darwin wrong? Well, he was right about natural selection, but he didn't say anything really new. He just gave a lot of examples to support an idea that had already been talked about by a creationist named Edward Blyth 30 years earlier. But he was dead wrong about the fact that natural selection does not lead to goo to you, microbe to microbiologist evolution. I want to close with a verse from the book of Romans. Paul says this, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse." Paul says that the fingerprints of God are all over His creation. And if we don't see it, it's because we are deliberately suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. And so, may God help us to see the evidence that He has given that confirms His Word right in Genesis. God bless you.